As you know, we have a lecture on Chinese philosophy, in particular on Confucius, the sage from China. And our lecturer tonight, our guest lecturer is Ivo Stanoev. He's a very modest person, so I'm afraid he will tell you, oh, I'm a Mr. Nobody, and so on and so forth. But he's an extremely knowledgeable person when it comes to Asian cultures, Asian philosophy. I've read some things that he has written on Confucius in particular, and he's Bulgarian, as you can understand from his name. He lives in Благоевград now, but recently he was back from China, where he spent the last 9 years of his life. Before being in China, I was in South Korea for 6 years. So he was in East Asia for 15 years of his life. There he had the opportunity to study Asian cultures, Asian philosophies, and he was a teacher there, a teacher of English. He still teaches English now here in Благоевград, but as you can see from not only the topic of his presentation, but also a few nice things that he has brought from China, he still cultivates his passion for Asian philosophies. Well, this said, I just want to thank Ivo for accepting my invitation, and I will leave the floor to you for the lecture. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, so yeah, I'm really that nobody, but the original idea with which I went to Diego was to have a little meeting with a couple of his students if they're interested in Chinese philosophy, but he embraced it so enthusiastically, so suddenly I'm here giving a lecture. Anyway, thanks for the invitation, and let's start. Today I'll be talking about Chinese philosophy, and I'll start with Confucius. He isn't my favorite Chinese philosopher, that'll be Lao Tzu over there. But I believe that we owe him the honor of being the first because of his huge influence on Chinese philosophy, politics, and society as a whole. And many people believe that all Chinese philosophy after him is actually a reaction to him. And I'm sure that the American philosopher Will Durant had very good reasons when he put Confucius on the top spot on his very exclusive list of the 10 greatest thinkers of all time. That was Confucius was number one. And during the lecture, I'll be quoting from a little book called the Analects. The Chinese name is Lun Yu, which means collected sayings. And this is what it is. It was not written by Confucius. It's a collection of his sayings and dialogues, which was compiled after his death by his disciples. And as Socrates, Confucius never wrote anything to explain his philosophy. So all we have is all these sayings, and I'll be quoting quite a lot of them. And before I start talking about Confucius, I would like to put the time of Confucius in a little historical context. So we're talking about the 6th and 5th centuries BC. This is the time of the already dysfunctional Eastern Zhou dynasty. And, but by the time, the emperor was only emperor in name. The power was in the hands of local landlords. Confucius was born in the state of Lu, that's here, which is in nowadays Shandong province. It's north of Shanghai, across from Korea. And he was born in a family of minor nobility. His father died when Confucius was only 3, so he was raised by his mom. And although they were relatively poor, she managed to give him very good education, something in which he was helped by Confucius himself. He was very eager to study. He's famous with his eagerness to study. And so he looks around, he sees all this constant warfare and suffering, because during that time, China is actually divided in tens of small states. It's not one state. At some point, the number reaches 140. So Confucius looks around, and he's looking for a solution. And as everybody knows, Confucius is conservative, so he looks back. He's not looking forward, he's looking back. And he finds the solution in the glories of the Western Zhou dynasty. So the Zhou dynasty is the longest dynasty in Chinese history. It's from like circa 1045 to 256 BC. But the actual political control of the whole territory by the emperor is only until 771 BC. And this is the Western Zhou, the successful Zhou, which Confucius picks up as a model. The next period is the Eastern Zhou when, as I said, the central authority is weakening. And so this is the time when Confucius lives. During this period, between 7th and 3rd centuries BC, the feudal system in China undergoes some very significant changes. Confucius is believed to be the first professional teacher in China. Maybe not the first, but the foremost, the first who taught many students. And so during that time, 17th, 18th, 3rd century, the only people who had access to education was the nobility, the lords. So they were not only rulers, they were the only ones who had education. But during the 7th and 3rd century BC, all the wars and stuff, some of the nobility, they lost their wealth, their money, their title, and they fell down to the level of regular people. And when they spread among the regular people, of course, they brought with them their abilities. Some of them were specialists in agriculture, others were military specialists, and still others knew the laws. And when they started to express their ideas among, like private individuals, so they became the first teachers. And Actually, the name for Confucianism in China is Rujia. They don't say Confucianism, they Rujia. Ru means somebody who is a specialist in rituals and the classic books and such, like a literati, a scholar. And Confucius was such a scholar. So even now in China, when they don't say Confucianism, they say Rujia. And there is another name-connected fact. Actually, Confucius and Mencius are the only Chinese philosopher who have Latinized names. So Confucius actually is the Latinized form of his, his Chinese name, which is Confucii. So his actual name is Kongqiu. Kongqiu, Kong is his family name, and they call him Kongzi. Zi means master, old master, teacher, so it's honorary. So Kongzi is Master Kong. But later, and this Zi, which means master, almost all of the other Chinese philosophers, they have in their name. You have Lao Zi, Mo Zi, Xuan Zi, Meng Zi, they all have this Zi. So later, to further distinguish Confucius, they added the Fu, which means great. So we say Gong Fu Zi, Confucius. And in the same way, Meng Zi is Mencius. These are the only two with Latinized names. So as we said, Confucius is a conservative, and for the solution of the problems, he is looking back. He doesn't think that the problem is lack of innovation or sticking with the old. No, the problem is abandoning and forgetting the ancestors. And at 7.1, he famously says that I am a transmitter and not a maker. Confucius never says, this is mine, or I made this new philosophy, just follow it. No, all he says is, I transmit all knowledge from the Western Zhou. I'm a transmitter, not a maker, believing and loving the Asians. And actually, you can see here, this is Zi Yue. This is the Zi Yue. Many of these passages start with Zi Yue, which means the master said, and then they go. That means Confucius said that. And he was mainly interested in the proper administration of the state, how to make the state work better. In his native state of Lu, he had some success, and he eventually became Minister of Crime in Lu. And as you can imagine, he managed to make some powerful enemies when he was implementing his policies, so he was forced out. And he was not forced out of the job, he had to leave his native state of Lu. He spent the next 12 years wandering around China. As you saw, there are many states to wander around, and basically looking for employment. He was looking for anyone who will employ him as a minister or king's advisor to implement his policies. The trip was a total failure, and at some point he barely escaped death. He was surrounded with his disciples from some hostile soldiers. And that was it. During this wandering around China, once a border guard said of Confucius, described him as the wooden tongue for a bell of the age, sounding heaven's prophetic note to awaken the people. And there is some indication that Confucius himself believed that he was on a mission. He had some mission from above, mission being to help China rediscover the old ways, the heavenly ways of Western Zhou, which was somehow revealed by heaven to the Western kings of Western Zhou, and then through the classic books and the rituals they passed, and that's how they reached the state of Lu, which is the Confucius native state, and so he would help people discover. This is not unlike Socrates, who also, during his trial, described himself as a godfly sent from the gods of Olympus to awaken Greece. Okay, for these constant attempts of Confucius to do something for the good of society, he was very often ridiculed by the Taoists. This is the other major philosophical school in China, the Taoists, and we're not going to talk about them now. Suffice it to say, they were not great believers in the possibility of social organization, just social organization. They were hermits and recluses, and they believed that actually people have to go back to nature, that civilization itself is not so much solution, it's part of the problem. So one of these hermit Taoists described Confucius as the one who knows he cannot succeed, yet keeps on trying to do so. So you know you cannot succeed. Look at that. The people are not going to do the right thing, so why you keep trying to do so? And here's the answer of actually Zi Lu answers. This is one of Confucius' favorite disciples, and he says this, 18.7. it is not right to refuse to serve in office. If the regulations between old and young in family life are not to be set aside, how is it then that you set aside the duty that exists between sovereign and subject? In your desire to maintain your personal purity, you subvert the great relationship of society, this relationship between the sovereign and the subject. So here, Confucius stresses what is for him an obvious connection between family relations, regulations, and the state relations. So this is, and so this connection between family and state can be found time and again in Confucian literature. And actually, here he also says that in the clash between personal and group, society, Confucius is always on the side of society. Something more, he calls these personal aspirations subversive and egoistic. And as he said, it is not right to refuse to serve in office. You must serve his office. That's the answer to the Taoists. And so if for the Greeks, it was a city-state. You have a polis with equal citizens, at least the male adult part of it, no women and slaves. For Confucius, China is always a family state. It's a family state. And in the West, we might see ourselves like these individuals that go through world without individuality. But for Confucius, it is family and society that make us a person. What we are depends on our roles in family and in society. So thus perceived, this state becomes a social organization modeled after the naturally unequal regulation of the family. So this unequalness in the family, you have parents and kids, older, younger, husband, wife. This inequality for Confucius is natural. Not only that, it is an integral part from any attempt to build a harmonious society. If you want to make a good society, you need this inequality. And later, Mencius is maybe the second major Confucian scholar in Chinese history, Mencius. He defines the 5 basic relationships of humanity as follows: father-son, sovereign-minister, husband-wife, old-young, and friend-friend. So as you can see, out of 5, just 1 is a relation between equal parts. In all the cases, you have a seniority on one side. And this family and its relations is still very important in Asia. The first Chinese dictionary, which is before Christ, he had like 100 definitions for family relations. And most of them have no equivalent in English. We don't know what to say to them. When I was living in Korea, for example, they told me that little girls in school, not little, like 12, 13, 14, in school they had these special classes when they had to learn all these possible names for their future in-laws, like why? To become good wives. So you have to know all the names. Then I moved to China. In China, a lot of people are kind of reluctant to use proper names, especially kids. You ask them, what's your father's name? And it's like, oh my. And if you keep pressing, they kind of feel embarrassed. And they'll tell eventually, but very quickly and kind of like, in a very quiet. Instead of that, it's more like, oh, she's Tom's mother, or he's David's wife, or his grandma, grandpa. Actually, if you ask kids, probably they don't know the proper names of their grandma, grandpa, especially the mother's side, on the mother's side. Okay, so, and already this is the second chapter of book 1, Confucius says, those who in private life behave well towards their parents and elder brothers, in public life seldom show a disposition to resist the authority of their superiors, and as for such men starting a revolution, no instance of this has ever occurred. It is upon the trunk, this is bun, which means fundament, root, origin, source, that a gentleman, Zhuangzi will talk about that a little bit later, works. When that is firmly set up, the Tao, famous Tao, grows, and surely proper behavior towards parents and elder brothers is the trunk of goodness run. So here we have some notions we'll talk about later. We have the, whoopsie, again, not this. So Zhuangzi, this is the gentleman or the ruler or the perfect man, the virtuous man. Ren is the perfect virtue, goodness for Confucius. So what he says here that if you want the Tao is the right way of doing things. So if the ruler wants the Tao, the right way to grow, he has to work on the fundamentals, the root. And what is the root? What is the origin of goodness? This is proper behavior towards parents and older people. And of course, Confucius is a conservative, so for him, a revolution is the biggest evil in the state possible. You don't need revolutions. So the best antidote to urge for change, for revolution, what is it? Obey your parents and behave well with older people. So for Confucius, the family model is the base upon which a benevolent and humane society can be built. You want a good benevolent society, use the model of the family, unequally, but naturally so. And at age 67, he returns home after this wandering around, unsuccessful, and he spent the rest of his life teaching and preserving his beloved classics. He wrote commentaries, he edited the classic books. At 479 BC, he died, age 73, and according to the records of the historian, he had about 3,000 followers. I don't know if that's correctly, but that's what it says. And 72 of them mastered the 6 arts. The 6 arts, rites, music, archery, chariot riding, and calligraphy, and math. So these are the 6 arts. When he died, I'm sure he couldn't imagine that, 2,500 years later, I'll be talking about him here, and the whole world will know him. He probably saw himself as a total failure. Nobody was listening to him. He never got a job. He had a couple of followers, but he couldn't be more wrong, because during the Han Dynasty, Confucianism becomes official philosophy of the Chinese rulers around the time of Jesus. And this is a very practical philosophy, day-to-day philosophy. It is not as abstract as, and far less systematic than Western philosophy. Not much of an argument. Instead, it relies on short, cryptic sayings, which are open to various interpretation. And now, we are going to go to some of these virtues. And we'll start with the virtue of run. Over there, it's over there. So run. So I put these there because later I'll probably use the run instead of translation, because there are several translations. So I'll be run, li, chunzi, and dao, so I put them over there. It's been translated on benevolence, humaneness, goodness, perfect virtue, the virtue. And this is the character, and it consists of 2 parts. So on the left side, this is a part which means person, and then the other one means two. So it is kind of expressive of the relations that should pertain between people. So it's some say that you cannot have run if you have only one person. You need at least 2 people to have this goodness. At 6.28, talking about goodness, Confucius says, as for goodness, run. You yourself desire rank and standing, then help others to get rank and standing. You want to turn your own merit to account, then help others to turn theirs to account. In fact, the ability to take one's own feelings as a guide, that is the sort of thing that lies in the direction of goodness. So here, again, we have a heavy stress on group, on society. A real run person, if he wants to get a position, he must help others get that. If he wants to get recognition, you help others to get the recognition. So in this way, it's a virtue of society rather than an internal matter of only consciousness, like I'm virtuous and I don't care about the others, right? No, if you want to be run, you must help other people. And for example, at 12.22, when asked what is run, Confucius says to love others. That's it. Simple. Love others. And then again, on another occasion, when asked in 12.02, what is run, he says, do not do to others what you would not like yourself. Sounds familiar? Yeah, I'm not saying Jesus stole it. Just on the record, the master said it first. Okay, so keep going. So for Confucius, this is the perfect virtue, the virtue. You can say the virtue. Not much of an explanation what exactly it is, but this is on top of the virtues. And according to Confucius, it's hardly ever possible to attain this virtue. And as an example to someone getting closest to virtue, to this real run, he gives his favorite disciple, Yang Hui. At 6:05, the master said, Hui is capable of occupying his whole mind for 3 months on end with no thought but that for goodness run. The others can do so, some for a day, some even a month, but that is all. Now, the time frame, it will come again. It's important. So you achieve this run, but he can keep it for 3 months, others a day, not a month. And Confucius didn't consider himself a proper run. He says at 7.33, the sage and the man of proper virtue, how can I dare compare myself to them? He didn't dare do that. And again, later at 4:06, the master said, I have not seen a person who loved virtue or one who hated what was not virtuous. He who loved virtue would esteem nothing above it. He who hated what is not virtuous would practice virtue in such a way that he would not allow anything that is not virtuous to approach his person. Is anyone able to, for one day, to apply his strength to virtue? Have not seen the case in which his strength would be insufficient. Should there be possibly any such case? I have not seen. So here, it's our commitment to doing what is right, the problem. It's not that it's impossible to do. Actually, in most cases, doing the right thing does not require impossible effort. The problem is that you have to will to do it. Sometimes it's really small, but I'm not going to bother with this. So for Confucius, this is a problem. It's not a lack of strength. It's a deficiency in willingness. So it is the will that is weak. And at 7.29, again, Confucius says, if we really wanted goodness, we should find it at our very side. It's right next to you. Just you have to will it. You have to want to do it. So although Confucius thinks that run is hardly ever achievable, still we have to strive after that. You have to try. Why? Because it's so much worth it. It's worthier than life itself. And at 15.8, Confucius says, a man with benevolence, run, who will not seek to live at the expense of injuring his run. He will even sacrifice his life to preserve his run. So it's worthier than life. And we go to the next one. And this is the virtue of li, which is ritual, rites, ceremony, etiquette, propriety, good custom. And for Confucius, this is li is the fundamental principle of social and political organization. This is a Chinese scholar, Professor Chen Rongjie, he says that li originally meant a religious sacrifice, but has come to mean ceremony, ritual, decorum, rules of propriety, good form, good custom, etc. Has even been equated with natural law. So as we said, Confucius is conservative. So he looks back for a solution. He has this very strong connection with the past, and that might be connected with the ancestor worship. This is the main religion in China, ancestor worship, and this religion, by its definition, pays heavy attention on history and on tradition. So, and even the character itself, it's comprised from, this is a tripod wine holder used in religious ceremonies. This is a sacrificial vessel, and this is the rice. And this is actually how the character. At first, it was just a drawing of all this stuff, and then this, and then this, and now this is the simplified form used only after the new China Communist. This is the old one used in Taiwan and Hong Kong. So as we can see, it's strongly connected with religion, ceremonies, and rituals. Actually, it says that the first royal families in China, they got their royal power because they had the rights to organize and perform the rites of ancestor worship for the state's ancestors. So that's how they got their royal powers. And according to Confucius, ritual is what makes a group of people a group of proper human beings. It is a primary mean for people to become human, because a person is not a human being unless least it has a ritual, it has the rights, it knows how to interact with people. It is, you can say, the backbone of a well-ordered society. So it is, you can think of that kind of like a behavioral language. This language helps us to act appropriately in different social situations. And this is not only about big and elaborate ceremonies. It goes to everyday small things like greeting people, thanking people, expressing joy or sorrow. For example, in a difficult situation, let's say a death of a loved one, right? So from the outside, you look and say, oh, these burial ceremonies are so cumbersome and there's a needless. Why? But for the people directly affected, they might channel, maybe even lessen to a degree, their sorrow. Or at least it'll take off their mind for a while from the tragedy. Also, in the West, we shake hands. In Korea and Japan, people just bow. In the West, avoiding eye contact is like, ooh, something, shifty eyes, right? So it's something dishonest. But if you go to Asia, Korea, Japan, a steady eye contact is considered as something rude, especially if you're talking between people of different social status. You don't do that. In Asia, it's customary. You give and receive things with two hands. You don't go just with one hand. Younger adults and kids, when there is a big family reunion and everybody's at the table, they wait for the older one to take the first bite, and after that they can start talking. And all these little things that allow us properly to take our place in family and society. And propriety actually is one of the translation for Li. It's propriety. And at 1201, when asked about the Li, the master said, to discipline oneself to fulfill the rules of propriety, Li, is a perfect virtue, run. If a ruler could, for one day, himself submit to ritual, everyone under heaven would respond to his goodness, run. And when pressed to elaborate on that, he goes with the next. Do not look at what is contrary to propriety. Do not listen to what is contrary to propriety. Do not speak of what is contrary to propriety. Do not do anything which is contrary to propriety. And as you can see yourself, for Confucius, Li is right at the center of the social and political life. Everything revolves around it. And most importantly, according to Li, you cannot do anything if you neglect Li. Any neglecting of the proper ritual and rites will bring some really bad consequences. And as an example of how dangerous is, how big is the danger of neglecting ritual, at 3.1, Confucius said, he said of the head of the Ji family, this is one of the powerful families in his state of Lu, who had 8 rows of dancers in his court, right? There were some festivities, and he had 8 court of dancers. So Confucius says, if this can be endured, what cannot be endured? So for someone who doesn't know ritual, we say, hey, wait a minute, what is that? It's a petty remark, right? Don't be so pedantic about this. But the thing is that, according to proper protocol, 8 rows of dancers are only allowed to the king of Zhou. That's what it is. So by having these 8 rows of dancers, this mere official, he's just nobody. He had some money, throw 8 rows. So he's in fact usurping the king's power. And as far as Confucius is concerned, he may just throw on a crown and go parade himself with the scepters here. He's the emperor himself. And this little digression from the proper ritual is for Confucius the first step to chaos and ruin. And here, I think, will be fitting to make a comparison with Plato, who also in his Republic warns that if you neglect the music and gymnastics, the education, this will be the beginning of the ruin of the states. And in book form, his Republic, he actually says, this is the point to which, above all, the attention of our rulers should be directed, that music and gymnastics be preserved in their original form, and no innovation made. They must do their utmost to maintain them intact. Any musical innovation, a little later, any musical innovation is full of danger for the whole state and ought to be prohibited. So this passage has gotten Plato some very severe criticism from many Western defenders of innovation and progress, but I'm sure that Confucius will be right behind him on that one. So innovation is dangerous. Don't play with that. It's not a good idea. So next one, Li and the idea of self-cultivation through habituation. So these rites and ceremonies, Li, they can use as a self-cultivation tool. So through rites and ceremonies, we get used to doing the right thing. When we get used to doing that thing, we start liking it. We like the things we know. And when you start liking it, then you might seek it, go after it. So that's the idea. You get habituated to doing something, and as you're liking it, and then you keep doing it. And also, Plato and Aristotle also argue that moral character can be developed through habituation. Actually, in his second book of the Nicomacheanites, Aristotle says that, I quote, "It is through just action that the just man is created," end quote. That's what they say. And so in 1.15, Zigong, this is another disciple of Confucius, he quotes the book of poetry. It's a very old text. It says, like bone cut, like horn polished, like jade carved, like stone ground. So it is believed that the disciple is using this this poem, to liken the Confucius refinement of his moral character to all the actions deployed in the poem. You have cutting, polishing, carving, and ground. This is all process. And by the way, all the material is kind of like hard. You have bone, you have horn, stone, all hard, especially jade. Jade is very hard to work upon. So you need good tools, and you need perseverance, you need time. But the thing is that, just like in Confucius likes this metaphor of carving, right? So because in carving, you take a piece of shapeless, ugly, crude thing, and then you apply the tools. It takes time, of course. It takes time, it's hard. But if you are patient and hardworking enough, the end product is something beautiful. So it's worth it to spend all this time. And many commentators believe that this ode actually is kind of like a metaphor for the arduous, it's very hard process, but in the same time very rewarding, because the end product is something good. You become a better person, you become a moral person. And that's the goal. The goal is to get a level of internalization of all these rules and requirements and of ritual when you start doing the things automatically. You do the right things automatically. In any given situation, you just do the right thing. And and 2.4, Confucius famously described his own path of self-cultivation. And he said, at 15, I dedicated myself to learning. At 30, I established myself in society. He got recognized in society. At 40, I had no more perplexities. He began to understand the world. At 50, I knew the will of heaven. That will be destiny. And at 60, I knew the truth in all I heard. At 70, I could follow the wishes of my heart without exceeding what is right. And this is the end goal, when you can follow all the wishes of your heart, and you don't worry that you will ever overstep the boundary of propriety. You just, all you wish is in the bounds of propriety. You have only proper wishes, or something like that. And so Confucius believes that we can train our moral character. We can train it to automatically do the moral thing. So he thinks that if we do the right actions, we'll get used to them, and then we'll do them. So it is a little bit like in the case of the physical body, where you, through repetition, you achieve what is called a long-term muscle memory. So through this long-term muscle memory helps you to do action. They improve with time, and at some point it's just automatic. Like you typing on the computer, driving a car, playing a musical instrument, all these are automatic. You practice, you practice, you practice. At some point you start doing them automatically. And so a real run person, a real sage, so by this good education and self-improvement, because of that, so he will do what is right in any situation, and not because that's the rule, that's what it says. No, he's doing it just because that is the right thing. And in fact, in virtue ethics, which is Confucian ethics is, the good is defined not by the written rules. Like, for example, in Kantian ethics, you have a rule, you follow it, it's moral. You don't, it's not. No. In Confucian's ethics, the good is what the sage will do in a certain situation, not what is the rule. The sage is the one who will tell you, watch the sage, he's doing it, that's the moral thing. And he will do that not because it is prescribed, just because it is the right thing to do. And actually in the quote we saw earlier, 6.28, he finished with the sentence, the ability to use our own feelings as a guide, this might be called the art of virtue run. So you have your moral compass inside you. You don't need rules from the outside. So, of course, Confucius knew that such a high level of self-cultivation is possible for but only few people, right? Masses, it's not accessible to the masses. So his best hope will be to have a virtuous monarch who will instill the proper rituals and rites. The monarch will understand them, and then he will kind of like not enforce them, but yeah, implement them in the state, and then the people will follow if they don't fully understand, but they will follow. So, and to instill these rites and rituals, of course, Confucius says this is the Western Joe. This is the model. You just take it and get people habituated to it. They'll get used to it. They'll start liking it, and they'll follow it. So when they are habituated, they will go after the virtuous. Confucius believes that this virtuous monarch can, a good example from such a monarch can do wonders. He believed that people will follow a good example. At some point in the Analects, he actually likens such a monarch to the North Pole star, which stayed up steady in the sky, and everything revolves around it in an orderly manner. So, and of course, we come to the question, can it work? So I think that it depends on what level we ask the question. If you say, can it work on a big, social state level, a lot of group, I would say no. And the whole world of the history of the world in the 2,500 years after the death of Confucius will be my point. But I do believe that it can work on individual level. And then Confucius himself will be my proof. So, as we said, he was hoping that the monarch with its virtue will lead and the people will follow. So that's what he's working for. He's looking for a good monarch and people habituated to doing the right thing. Personally, I agree with this guy, this Arab philosopher from the 10th century, Al-Mari, who says that since the evils of society are due to the nature of man, reform is hopeless. And so the whole of Analects, I read the Analects mostly as a personal guide for personal improvement and moral betterment. The political part is a little interest to me. And I do the same with Plato's Republic. Anyway, so in all these wondering, can it work, cannot work, can we build a benevolent society, we come to the notion of human nature, human nature. Unfortunately, Confucius doesn't tell us what he thinks about human nature. Is it good? Is it bad? And actually, in the whole book, the Analects, he mentions this character only 2 times. And at first, at 5:13, his disciple, Zigong, informs us that the master's personal display of his principles and ordinary descriptions of them may be heard. His discourses about man's nature, Xing, and the way of heaven, Dao, that's the other one, cannot be heard. And the only time when Confucius himself mentions Xing, human nature, is when he tells us that by nature, Xing, near together, by practice, far apart. So even though Confucius doesn't tell us exactly what he thinks, from the Analects, it might be inferred that he thought of human nature as at best neutral, but maybe tending to badness. So it is in need, it's crude, it's uncultured, so there is a dire need of cultural tools to shape it better. And a great example of this need of cultural tools is 6.16, where he says, when native substance overwhelms cultural refinement, the result is a crude rustic. So you have too much stuff inside and no culture, it's not nice. It's too crude, it's ugly. But on the other hand, when your cultural refinement overwhelms the native substance, then the result is a pedant scribe. So that's not a solution too. You have, a pedant scribe. So only when culture and native substance are perfectly mixed and balanced do you have a gentleman. And this is the next one. This is over there. Oopsie. Zhunzi. Zhunzi. We'll talk about this just in a second. So Zhunzi, this gentleman, is the one who perfectly harmonized his internal stuff, what is inside him, with the external requirements of rites and rituals. Later, Mencius and Xunzi, two Confucianism, they have an extensive argument about is it human nature bad or good. Mencius says it's mostly good, Xunzi says it's mostly bad. Mencius wins the argument. And ever since, the Confucians view human nature as mostly good. But still, it needs enlightenment, it needs help in its enculturation. And Zhuanzi. Zhuanzi, this is the translation, nobleman, gentleman, man of virtue, superior person. And the most common is probably gentleman, and it's a good translation. Actually, Zhuanzi, originally, before Confucius, it just meant a son of a lord. Zhuan, the first part, sorry. So this first part, over there, means lord. The ruler of the state is Zhuan. Zi is son, so you have son of a lord. But Confucius is the one who opens this position for people who don't have this noble birth. He opens it, but of course, not everybody can get in. To get in, what you have to do, you have to go through a self-cultivation and practice of the 5 cardinal virtues. So these are the 5 cardinal virtues of Confucianism: benevolence, ren, proper rights, li, we talked about this, justice, knowledge, and integrity, xin. So if you practice very hard all these 5 virtues, and if you improve yourself, you can become a gentleman, a zhuanzi, even if you don't have the noble birth. It's not. So some say here, revolutionary idea of meritocracy, already introduced in the analects. I'll be careful to overplay this revolutionization of the idea, but it is there. And it was further developed in the imperial examination system. It's something that was introduced also in the Han Dynasty, which is uniquely Chinese. That was the way to fill in all the bureaucratic apparatus with people who went through examination. For example, like here, they will study. And they had examination. They started on a local level and then big until they meet at the capital. So the finalist in the capital, who has the highest score, gets the prime minister job, the second one then. And on paper, it's open to everyone. Okay, you go to the... But of course, on practice, it was mostly wealthy people who could afford it. It takes time and resources, so poor people could not do it often, but it has happened. So we can see this zhuanzi as a stepping stone to becoming a real Ren sage. As we said, becoming a Ren is really tough. So that will be the stepping stone. And we can think of zhuanzi and Ren as like zhuanzi is a self-cultivated moral person inside. And then the difference between zhuanzi and Ren is that the Ren also has this inside virtue, but he also helps others. We talked about he's helping others, so he's influencing the people around him. And then the last stage will be the sage, sheng, which these people are the people who influence everything under heaven, so the whole world. And they believe there's some very ancient Chinese sage kings, Yao, Xuan, they lived in a distant past, so they were given this title, sage. But zhuanzi is doable. You can do that. And so at 14.7, the master said, it is possible to be a true gentleman, yet lack goodness, but there has never existed a good man who was not a gentleman. So you must become a zhuanzi, and then you can try to go up. And since it's doable, Confucius gives us some very practical advice. How can we do that? How can we better ourselves? And I'll read some of these. For example, 16.7, there are 3 things which the gentleman should guard against. In his youth, when not yet fully physically developed, he should guard against lust. In his prime, he should guard against strife. When he is old and weak, should guard against avarice. Also about good and bad pleasure. 16.5. There are 3 sorts of pleasure that are profitable and 3 sorts that are harmful. The pleasure got from the right order of ritual and music, the pleasure of discussing the good points in the conduct of others, the pleasure of having many wise friends are all profitable. The pleasure of extravagant enjoyment, idle wandering about, and ease and comfort, these are harmful. Again, some very practical, simple steps for anyone who wants to become a zhuanzi. 1.14, the master said, he who aims to be a man of complete virtue, zhuanzi, in his food does not seek to gratify his appetite, nor in his dwelling place does he seek the appliances of ease. He is earnest in what he is doing and careful in speech. He frequents the company of men of principle that he may be rectified. Such a person may be said indeed to love to learn, which might be translated as a philosopher, loving wisdom. Philosopher. Short and clear, right? All you need is follow these few steps and you can become a zhuanzi. Congratulations. But it's not that easy in practice. Here's some more. 4.5, the master said, riches and honors are what men desire. If it cannot be obtained in the proper way, they should not be held. Poverty and meanness are what men dislike. If it cannot be avoided in the proper way, they should not be avoided. And this is exactly the mark of a zhunzi. This is someone who can go without the desirable thing and also endure graciously when undesirable thing befall them. There's no problem with that. Unlike the common small people who constantly lust after the goodies in life and then whine about, oh, why me, when something happens to them. So talking about Zichang, another follower of his, Confucius gives us 4 of the characteristics of the Zhunzi. In his conduct of himself, he is humble. In serving his superior, he was respectful. In providing for the needs of the people, he was kind. In ordering the people, he was just. And another one is in 15.20. The demands that a Zhunzi makes are upon himself. Those that a small man makes are upon others. And I absolutely love this distinction which Confucius makes between the gentleman and the small man. And actually the character for small man is really, it's small and man. It really means small. And so this notion of natural inequality between people may be strange, foreign, not to say offensive to Western ears, but you can find it all over Chinese philosophical books. And for example, 16.9, those who are born with understanding are the highest class of men. Those who learn and so readily get possession of knowledge are the next. After them are those who are dull and stupid and yet still learn. As to those who are stupid and dull and yet do not learn, they are the lowest class. So much for natural equality. He doesn't buy it. Okay? So, and in my opinion, it's very refreshing. You know, no political correctness crap, very straightforward assessment of the intellectual and moral capacity of all people. They're not equal. That's what it says. Okay, so, and talking about straightforward talk, another notion in Confucian is the so-called name rectification, zhengming, to straighten up the names. And it's interesting that when asked about what will be the first thing he will do if he was elected as a ruler, minister of Wei, Confucius says at 13.3, what is necessary is to rectify the names. Okay? So this for him is obviously very important. The connection between the correct language and a well-ordered society is very direct for Confucius. And here there is another, a little longer quotation, sorry. Why? He says, if names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things. If language be not in accordance with the truth of things, affairs cannot be carried on to success. When affairs cannot be carried on to success, proprieties and music will not flourish. When proprieties and music do not flourish, punishment will not be properly awarded. When punishments are not properly awarded, the people do not know how to move hand or foot. Therefore, a superior man, zhunzi, considers it necessary that the names he uses may be spoken appropriately, and also that what he speaks may be carried out appropriately. What the superior man requires is just that in his words there may be nothing incorrect. Very important for him. And when he was asked about the government, Confucius says in 12.11, let the ruler be a ruler, the father a father, and the son a son. And for Confucius, this is not a mere tautology. The first ruler here is the person who at this moment has the crown on his head. This is the ruler as he is. This is the guy. But the second one, the ruler, this is the ruler as he ought to be. This is the ideal of a ruler. And same with father and son. So according to Confucius, the name contains some implications in itself. It's not just a name, which constitute the essence of the class of thing to which it belongs. So in this case, the ruler, which is, must act as a ruler ought to act, not as a good ruler. If he doesn't act as a good ruler, he's not a ruler. Although maybe everybody says, yeah, that's the ruler. No, if he's not acting as he ought to act according to the name of this position, let's say. So in this case, name is not just a mere descriptive thing. Now it's prescriptive. It prescribes what to do. And it has some moral, it comes with moral force there. So only if there is a agreement between the name and the essence, then you can talk about the ruler. And okay. The last one is what is probably my favorite sentence in the whole of the Analects. 朝闻道，夕死可矣. The literal translation of all these characters is morning hear Dao, evening die can. Dao, he is Dao. Dao, of course, is the famous Dao, probably the most important philosophical category in all Chinese philosophy. And it means way, road, path, course, speech, method. And there is the Dao of people, the human Tao, the way of organizing a society. And also you have the heavenly Tao, which helps the whole universe, sustains it and makes it, and the universe, evolves around this nature. Confucius was mostly interested in the Tao of people. He was trying to find a right formula. But sometimes, I don't know, when I think about him, I kind of have this funny feeling that maybe in the privacy of his own thoughts, he was kind of like a Taoist, like I know, he spent his whole life trying to find the political formula, and Taoists ridiculed him for that. But I think that's because he loved people way too much. He couldn't leave them on their own, so he was trying to help, although he knew that is an impossible task and he will never succeed. Actually, I think, where was that? Okay, I can't find it. But anyway, some of his disciples says that the job of a gentleman is to do what is right, that the Tao will not succeed. He knows beforehand. So I suspect he knew that it's a doomed effect, but he had to go on. So some people, because he spent his life trying to find a political formula, they translate this like, if in the morning a Confucian scholar thinks that the Confucianism has been established in the state, he might die contented. Confucianism is the right way, there I can die. Others take it even a step further, and they say, they translate like, if a Confucian scholar hears the news in the morning that he was appointed on a high governmental post, so I got recognized, he can die contented. In line with my suspicion, which is not based on, but just a hint, that he was interested in the Tao of heaven, I just go with that. In the morning, if you understand the Tao, the heavenly Tao in the morning, then in the evening you can go ahead and die. There is nothing else for you to do. You just die a happy and blessed man. And okay, on this seemingly self-contradictory note of happy dying, I would like to end this little talk on Confucian and Chinese philosophy. Thank you very much for coming, guys. Yeah.